So should I unmute?
You're fine. You're already unmuted.
Mm-hmm. Hare Krishna.
Yes, Mataji, would you like to get started? 7:30.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Nice to be back here. Today we will cover chapter 18, which is Parikshit cursed by a Brahmin boy. We are getting very close to the end of Canto 1. And these last two chapters are very, very important. So in a little summary here. In chapter 4, the sages had asked about the birth and activities of Parikshit Maharaj. And they also asked how it happened that such a powerful king who had dominion over the whole world, he had wealth, youth, power, and fame. What made him give up everything and sit on the banks of the river Ganges waiting for death? What caused the Srimad Bhagavatam to be spoken? So they asked all these questions. And now, at the end of chapter, and then at the end of the chapter 17, Suta Goswami, having described the birth and different activities of Parikshit Maharaj, in this chapter begins to answer the last question that the sages had asked. What was that? What forced Parikshit Maharaj to give up everything and sit on the banks of the river Ganges, waiting for death in 7 days? Parikshit Maharaj took the curse as a great fortune because he knew when he was going to die, he could when he was going to die, so he could prepare for that moment. It opens up the existential question as to now what? Should I eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow I'm going to die? Is that the best use of my time? Or perhaps there may be something better, because now we leave this world. How the soul separates from the body, our consciousness at the time of death, dictates our next birth. So Parikshit Maharaj took it as a great blessing because he had a chance to mold his consciousness the proper way. So in this chapter, Parikshit Maharaj, cursed by a Brahmin boy, Suta Goswami begins to speak. Now, in the first 10 verses, he explains what has just happened and carry the hearer to what is going to happen. He will speak about the wonderful consciousness that Maharaj Parikshit had, how Parikshit Maharaj removed irreligion from his kingdom. After that, after the 10 verses, the sages speak. The sages want to hear more. First, they glorify the speaker. They say that the speaker is transparently giving the spiritual potency of Srimad Bhagavatam to the hearers. So they very much appreciate that he's doing that. Now, to be transparent is not easy. One needs to be so pure, has to be free from all extraneous desires other than seeking to please Krishna, no other than seeking to please Krishna, and to present the philosophy as it is. So Sutta Goswami was certainly glorious due to his purity, and to repeat according, and he repeated according to his own realizations. So the sages were experiencing the spiritual energy, and then the sages put in their request. What do they say? Please, we want to hear more. Let us hear the pastime between Parikshit Maharaj and Sukadev Goswami. So Sutta Goswami begins to reply by first commending their questions, how the katha has to be purified even himself. Now, this is so much better than material good works, because when we give materially, we have that much less. But when we give spiritually, then we benefit 10 times more. It increases step by step. So Sutta Goswami begins by first humbly speaking about his own humble position. He then glorifies pure devotees, Krishna Katha, and then Krishna. All this will be done in the first 23 verses. And then the pastime of Parikshit Maharaj being cursed by a Brahmin boy begins, and it remains until the end of the chapter. So in our first slide, Sutta Goswami glorifies Parikshit Maharaj, his dealings with Kali, and more. So text 1, Sutta Goswami says, due to the mercy of personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who acts wonderfully, Maharaj Parikshit, though struck by the weapon of son of Drona in his mother's womb, could not be burned. So here in this first verse, Sutta Goswami is saying that due to the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Maharaj Parikshit could not be burned in the womb. And we heard about this pastime in chapter 8. Now, how within the womb he was saved by Krishna himself, that is explained in that chapter. Now, just think of the position of one who is protected by Krishna. Is so wonderful. One who's protected by Krishna, he can feel fearless, really protected. Now, this is the essence of Krishna consciousness, to place oneself under the shelter of Krishna. Now, if Krishna wishes to protect someone, then who can harm that person? If God decides, who can stop? On the other hand, if Krishna does not protect, then what circumstances can protect that person? If someone is due to get hurt, then who can give protection? In text 2, Sutta says, furthermore, Maharaj Parikshit was always consciously surrendered to the personality of Godhead, and therefore he was neither afraid nor overwhelmed by fear due to the snake bird, which was to bite him because of the fury of the Brahmin boy. So now this is very easy to understand theoretically, but when we are in a fearful situation, immediately terror enters our consciousness. And this is what we gain from the study of Srimad Bhagavatam, because we will gain the consciousness of Parikshit Maharaj at the last moment of death, which is a terrifying situation. One's mind becomes disturbed. We're thinking, where is safety? Where is security? At that moment, Parikshit Maharaj had his mind fixed on Krishna. Parikshit Maharaj's life was very fortunate. Only superficially it seems that he was unfortunate, but actually he was the most fortunate. His mind was steady. A similar example can be taken from King Chitraketu's life. When he was cursed by Parvati, he took that with so much grace, not having the slightest difficulty in taking that. Because he knew that when this happens, these pure devotees, the reason why they're fearless, they know that When this happens, but when they are under the Krishna's dependence fully, it doesn't matter where they are, whether they're in heaven or hell. These are all creations by the Lord. So the remaining verses, or the first 10 verses, describe how Kali had entered his kingdom, and his motive was Kali's motive was beating and exploitation of the earth and the cow, of dharma, and how Maharaj Parikshit dealt with that, and that Kali surrendered to him, and he accepted, and Parikshit Maharaj accepted that surrender. You may recall that from the last chapter. Parikshit Maharaj gave him places that did not exist in the kingdom. So Kali asked for another place, and he gave gold, places where gold is found. Now, the question can arise that it does seem that Parikshit Maharaj, by allowing Kali to live in his kingdom, this kind of backfired because he himself was cursed by that same Kali. In other words, he allowed Kali to live, but Kali did not spare his own life. His decision ended in his own death. So this question will be answered by Srila Prabhupada in the purport of verse 7. So we will go to this next slide, which will cover this. Why did Parikshit Maharaj allow Kali to come, which caused his own death? Now, I'll read to you a little bit from Prabhupada's purport, which kind of gives that answer. Maharaj Parikshit, being the most learned and experienced king by the grace of the Lord, was not unnecessarily envious of the personality of Kali, because he did not intend to give him any chance to perform any sinful act. He protected his subjects from falling prey to the sinful acts of the age of Kali, and at the same time, he gave full facility to the age of Kali by allotting him some particular places. At the end of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said that even though all nefarious activities of the personality of Kali are present, there's a great advantage in the age of Kali. One can attain salvation simply by chanting the holy name of the Lord. Thus, Maharaj Parikshit made an organized effort to propagate the chanting of the Lord's holy name, and thus he saved the citizens from the clutches of Kali. It is for this advantage only that the great sages sometimes wish all good for the age of Kali. So this is the answer to this, that Parikshit Maharaj, even by allowing him to enter his kingdom, he at the same time, he was also giving his citizens facility to counteract the Kali by giving them the chanting of the holy name. Such is the vision or caliber of a pure devotee who is also king, that he knows he doesn't stop the Lord's plan from unfolding, which was for Kali to come and Srimad Bhagavatam to be spoken. But at the same time, he takes steps to ward off Kali. So Prabhupada writes how even in this age, this can be done. Even though this is the age of Kali Yuga, but by chanting the holy name of the Lord, one can keep it away, keep Kali away. And devotees have nothing to fear from Kali. Very, very deep and nice point that how the chanting of the holy name is so powerful, and in another place, Prabhupada mentions how the chanting was the prime method for all yugas. But the reason why in this yuga is especially effective is because people, due to the miseries of this age, they can cry out to Krishna. They can cry out to Krishna in a way that the power of the holy name is invoked. Whereas in other ages, as you know, people were they were not suffering as much because they were more in the mode of goodness, especially in Satya Yuga. Okay, so in our next slide, we'll go to the sages wanting to hear the topics of the Lord and his devotees. So again, that eagerness point. And this will be covered from verses 11 to 17. So here, again, starting, the sages are saying that how they want to hear more about Krishna. So they've heard about from Sutta Goswami. Uh, they first glorify Sutta Goswami, and they've heard about the glories of Parikshit Maharaj, how he kept Kali away, and now they want to hear more, and they want to hear about Krishna. And Prabhupada has quoted this beautiful verse from, it's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita in Antalila. He quotes Rupa Goswami as saying, I do not know how much nectar the two syllables Krishna have produced. When the holy name of Krishna is chanted, it appears to dance within the mouth. Then we desire many, many mouths. When that name enters the holes of the ears, we desire many millions of ears. And when the holy name dances in the courtyard of the heart, it conquers the activities of the mind, and therefore all the senses become inert. So this is quoted in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So what happens is what happening here is the sages were experiencing this feeling. They wanted to have millions of ears to be able to hear the holy name because it was giving them so much nourishment, so much so that they did not even need to eat or sleep. They were getting like a stream of nectar of spiritual energy. So they were begged and begged Sutta Goswami that you are so learned, so pure, please tell us more. And then they go on to describing the glories of Krishna. So they are saying that, O Sutta Goswami, please describe these topics of the Lord, by which Maharaj Parikshit, whose intelligence was fixed on liberation, attained the lotus feet of the Lord, who is the shelter of Garuda, the king of the birds. Those topics were vibrated by the son of Vyasa, Sri Shukadev Goswami. So in the next slide, we will understand Sutta Goswami's mixed birth. And this is an important point to understand that Prabhupada makes it very clear in his purport for verse 18. Srila Sutta Goswami says, "O God, although we are born in a mixed caste, we are still promoted in birthright simply by serving and following the great who are advanced in knowledge. Even by conversing with such great souls, one can without delay cleanse oneself of all disqualifications resulting from lower birth." And Prabhupada writes in the purport that this verse proves that Srila Shukadev Goswami did not refuse to teach Sutta Goswami. Why? Because of his inferior birth. And also the sages of Naimisharanya did not refuse to hear lessons from him because of his inferior birth. This means, Prabhupada writes, that thousands of years ago, there was no bar in learning or preaching the transcendental science because of inferior birth. The rigidity of the so-called caste system in Hindu society became prominent within only 100 years or so, when the number of Dvija Bandhus or disqualified men in the families of higher caste increased. And Lord Sri Chaitanya revived the original Vedic system, and he elevated Thakur Haridas to the position of Namacharya, or the authority in preaching of the glories of the holy name. So what Sutta Goswami is saying here, that just by serving those who are very elevated, pure devotees, it takes care of all our own disqualifications. You see, it could be birth, the disqualification by birth or learning or gender, whatever it might be. It takes away everything. All the disqualifications is removed when we serve a pure devotee. And because Sutta Goswami was in the association of exalted personalities such as Vyasadeva, and Shukadev Goswami, and also the sages who were coming from very, very elevated families, and also very learned. All his disqualification went away. And according to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and all the acharyas, disqualification is not to be found in the Vedic scriptures. In fact, Bhakti, I remember how Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was very, clear on this point. And he in his own lifetime, he would take steps where he would go on big rallies on the road where he would include all types of people and even the people from the lower class, and this would infuriate the caste Brahmins, so that at one point they threatened to even kill him, and they engaged some, they engaged some killer, to secretly they paid him money and said, "You go and kill him," and of course Krishna protected him. And he, in fact, actually they bribed the police, and the police felt very bad, and they knew that he was a great sadhu, and they went to Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj and told him what was happening, and they gave him facility to escape from that place. So he was very open and vehement in this point, that he wanted to do away with the mentality of the caste system, and he openly, he was fearless, and he openly did that. So we'll go on to the next slide, which is Sutta Goswami glorifies the personality of Godhead. Remember, the sages were asking to hear more about the Lord. So in this, so from verses 19 to 24, he does that. So in text 20, it is now ascertained that he, the personality of Godhead, is unlimited, and there is none equal to him. Consequently, no one can speak of him adequately. Great demigods cannot obtain the favor of the goddess of fortune, even by prayers. But this very goddess renders service unto the Lord, although he is unwilling to have such service. So here the sages are saying how Krishna is a person, but he's also unlimited. So a person means that he has personality, he has characteristics. So how can someone be, a person, but also be unlimited? That is why some people think that to give Krishna, God, characteristics would mean that we are limiting him. But if the Supreme cannot have qualities, he cannot have a personality. Actually, that would limit him. So if Krishna exclaims, "I have form, I have mercy," how can that be? They say, right? But in God's case, in Krishna's case, this inconceivable factor can actually happen. In other words, everything comes together in Krishna. Even the inconceivable become conceivable. And of course, we cannot understand Krishna fully. We cannot understand his mind. So in text 21, who can be worthy of the name of the Lord, of the Supreme Lord, but the personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna? Brahmaji collected the water emanating from the nails of his feet in order to award it to Lord Shiva as a worshipful welcome. This very water, the Ganges, is purifying the whole universe, including Lord Shiva. So here in this text, they glorify Krishna, how the water that washes the feet is so purifying, so powerful, so great. When someone takes the water, puts it on his head, he's purified. Even Brahma and Shiva are purified. When we wash our feet, is impure and goes down the drain. So I'm sorry, these verses are spoken by Sutta Goswami. He's answering that question by the sages today, where they want him to describe the attributes of the Lord. So in text 22, self-controlled persons who are attached to the Supreme Lord, Shri Krishna, can all of a sudden give up the world of material attachment, including the gross body and subtle mind, and go away to attain the highest perfection of the renounced order of life, by which non-violence and renunciation are consequential. So here, Sutta Goswami is saying that if someone attains attachment to Krishna, because his qualities are so wonderful, so supremely attractive. And if someone even has a drop of attachment to Krishna, he can drop everything else within a minute. Even if he has billions of dollars, he would drop that. Just like if someone gets $1 billion, he can instantaneously give up 5 cents because everything else, when compared to Krishna, is useless. When that soul becomes fully immersed in love of Krishna, and such a soul will go to the supreme abode. And this is what Parikshit Maharaj did. So Suta Goswami is telling the sages that they should not be despondent that he was cursed, because he was sensing that the sages were getting very despondent because they knew what was going to come, that Parikshit Maharaj was going to be cursed and he was going to die in 7 days. And he's explaining that because you shouldn't be despondent. Why? Because of his great attachment to Krishna, it was not difficult for him to give up everything instantaneously. Even though he was a king involved with so much power, armies, wealth, everything, he was able to give up everything. Now, text 23. O rishis, who are as powerfully pure as the sun, I shall describe to you the transcendental pastimes of Vishnu as far as my knowledge is concerned, as the birds fly in the sky as far as their capacity allows. So in the same way, I will describe Krishna according to my capacity. So why are rishis being compared here to the sun? Because light is compared to knowledge. When we have knowledge, we can see things exactly as they are. In the dark, we may bang our knees, bump our head. But when we have light, we can see things as they are. And the holy person's duty is to give light. So he's complimenting the sages. You're the light of knowledge. And then he's saying that how the pastimes of Krishna are unlimitedly deep and no one can describe them in fullness. But he's saying that according to my own ability, I will describe, according to my own capacity. And then he's giving a very nice example. Just like the birds, they fly according to their capacity. For example, the eagle or pigeon all fly according to their level. The sky itself doesn't change. It's vast. So Krishna Katha is vast. And we all explain Krishna Katha according to our capacity. So now, Sutta Goswami begins telling this wonderful pastime of Parikshit Maharaj being cursed by the Brahmin boy. And this will take us to our next slide, where the story begins. And we also will hear the plan, Lord's plan behind the cursing of Parikshit Maharaj. Text 24 and 25, starting from that. Once upon a time, Maharaj Parikshit, while engaged in hunting in the forest with bow and arrows, became extremely fatigued, hungry, and thirsty while following the stags. While searching for a reservoir of water, he entered the hermitage of the well-known Shamika Rishi and saw the sage sitting silently with closed eyes. The Muni's sense organs, breath, mind, and intelligence were restrained from material activities, and he was situated in a trance, having achieved a transcendental position. Situated in a trance apart from the three wakefulness, dream, and unconsciousness, having achieved a transcendental position qualitatively equal with the Supreme Lord. The sage in meditation was covered by the skin of a stag, and long compressed hair was scattered all over him. The king, whose palate was dry from thirst, asked him for water. The king, not received by any formal welcome by means of being offered a seat, place, water, and sweet addresses, considered himself neglected, and so thinking, he became angry. O Brahmanas, the circumstances having distressed him with extreme hunger and thirst, the king directed towards the sage his anger and envy, which he had never before directed to a Brahmana. While leaving, the king, being so insulted, picked up a lifeless snake with his bow and angrily placed it on the shoulder of the sage. Then he returned to his palace. So the king was hungry and thirsty after coming from a hunting trip, and he saw the Shamak Rishi sitting very quietly. He was not breathing. The sage was in trance, right? And the king is thinking that I'm the king. I'm so thirsty. I'm asking for water. Do you not hear me? So in the Vedic culture, Prabhupada explains in the purport that if someone knocks on the door, you don't peep through the peephole. No, you open the door immediately and offer a seat and water. Even if an avowed enemy comes to the door, why? Because it means that anybody who comes, he's a guest. Parikshit Maharaj, he was not an enemy. He was an exalted personality. And the sage did not offer him even a kind word. So he became angry. Now the question is, how come such a great personality, such as Maharaj Parikshit, who can tolerate even the burning of the Brahmastra within the womb of his mother, how could he not control his hunger and thirst? So anyway, to give him tit for tat, Parikshit Maharaj threw that dead snake around his neck. So this is the beginning of this whole pastime. Krishna wanted to bring back the king quickly to the spiritual world and for Srimad Bhagavatam to be spoken. Because the king, while he's on this planet, is great. He's a great king, right? And he can protect his subjects. But the objective here is greater, is more than the king. It is the Kali Yuga coming, right? Krishna instituted this whole drama using his dear devotee Parikshit Maharaj. So the sage remained with the garland around his neck and the king walks out. But Prabhupada writes in the purport, Maharaj Parikshit was a pure devotee of the Lord, and there was no reason for him to become extremely fatigued, hungry, and thirsty, because a devotee of the Lord never becomes perturbed by such bodily demands. But by the desire of the Lord, such a devotee can become apparently fatigued and thirsty just to create a situation favorable for his renunciation of worldly activities. And he explains how one has to give up all attachment for worldly relations before one can go back to Godhead. So in text 31, upon returning, he began to contemplate and argue with himself whether the sage had actually been in meditation, with senses concentrated and eyes closed, or whether he had just been feigning trance just to avoid receiving a lower Kshatriya. So the story goes how when the king returned to the palace, he was wondering whether the sage was pretending or he was actually in meditation. No. So he had doubts because it's just like when we don't want to meet somebody, we pretend we are talking to somebody, right? So his point was the sage pretending or was he thinking, I don't want to meet him. He's lower than me. He's a Kshatriya. But Parikshit Maharaj immediately began to feel guilty of what he had done. And Prabhupada explains how this is the nature of any good person. When they do something improper, they immediately recognize it. It bothers them. So we'll go to our next slide, which is the Shringi's curse. And with it came the fall down of the Brahmanas, verses 32 to 37. So it describes how the Brahmana's son, he cursed Maharaj Parikshit. And this Brahman's son, he was playing with his boys, his friends, and he heard about this, his father, how Parikshit had thrown the snake around his father's neck. And he's angry. And he says, oh, just look at the sins of the rulers who, like crows and watchdogs at the door, perpetrate sins against their masters, contrary to the principles governing servants. The descendants of the kingly orders are definitely designated as watchdogs, and they must keep themselves at the door. On what grounds can dogs enter the house and claim to dine with the master on the same plate? After the departure of Lord Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead and the supreme ruler of everyone, these upstarts have flourished, our protector being gone. Therefore, I myself take up this matter and punish them. Just witness my power. The son of the Rishi, his eyes red hot with anger, touched the water of the river Kaushika while speaking to his playmates and discharged the following thunderbolt of words. The Brahmana's son cursed the king thus, on the seventh day from today, a snake bird will bite this most wretched one of that dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, because of his having broken the laws of etiquette by insulting my father. So Prabhupada writes in the purport that how by the influence of Kali, this Brahmana, this son of a Brahmana, became very puffed up. And he's so much puffed up that he compares Parikshit Maharaj to crows and watchdogs. Of course, Prabhupada explains that how Parikshit Maharaj is like the watchdog of the state. Why? Because he's king, and he has to keep, he has to look over the state and look over for his protection and defense. But to address such a great king as watchdog is a sign of less culture. And with that, the downfall of the Brahminical powers began. And what is this downfall? Prabhupada writes, when they give importance to birthright without culture. And since Brahmanas are the heads of the social order, all the other orders also began to deteriorate. Now, this beginning of Brahminical deterioration was highly deplored by the father of Shringi, as we will find in our next slide. In this slide, we'll cover how Shringi tells his father what he had done, and Shamaka Rishi regrets and he laments. Thereafter, when the boy returned to the hermitage, he saw a snake on his father's shoulder, and out of grief he cried very loudly, "O Brahmanas, the Rishi, who was born in the family of Angira Muni, hearing his son crying, gradually opened his eyes and saw the dead snake around his neck. He threw the dead snake aside and asked his son why he was crying, whether anyone had done him harm. On hearing this, the son explained to him what had happened. The father heard from his son that the king had been cursed, although he should have never been condemned, for he was the best among human beings. The rishi did not congratulate his son, but on the contrary, he began to repent, saying, "Alas, what a great sinful act has been performed by my son. He has avoided heavy punishment for an insignificant offense." So the boy, Shringi, he wanted to relieve the burden of his curse, and so that's why he started to cry. And the Shamak Rishi is really regretting this whole incident. How a great king, how his son had given such a big punishment for something so small. So in our next slide, Shamak Rishi glorifies Parikshit Maharaj and laments the demise of the kingly system. So he's explaining all this to his son. He's saying, "Oh, my boy, your intelligence is immature, and therefore you have no knowledge that the king, who's the best among human beings, is as good as the personality of Godhead. He's never to be placed on an equal footing with common men. The citizens of the state live in prosperity, being protected by his unsurpassable prowess. My dear boy, the Lord who carries the wheel of a chariot is represented by the monarchical regime. And when this regime is abolished, the whole world becomes filled with thieves who then at once vanquish their unprotected subjects like scattered lambs." So there are a few more verses. So basically, on this point, in this section, Shamak Rishi expresses his distraughtness over the act of his son, what his son has done by cursing. And then he's predicting what will happen when this monarchical system will fall, will become degraded. What will be the result of that? The Brahmana class, and this begins with the Brahmana class becoming proud, thinking that they are better than others. They begin to exploit. They think that they are better than the Kshatriyas. And the problem with this is that the Brahmanas, being the head of the society, they need humility, because to be learned means humility. And pride means forgetfulness of God and a relationship with Him. So when they exploit, or when they lord over the Kshatriyas, they cannot tolerate it. The Kshatriyas cannot tolerate it. Because as long as they are humble and full of knowledge, the Kshatriyas are happy to serve them. But as soon as the Kshatriyas feel that they're exploiting them, they cannot tolerate that. And so what happened in history is that with the impurity of the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas gave them up, cast them off. And with the result that when the men of power rule without the advice of the saintly Brahmins who give them knowledge, they become oppressive and they become addicted to horrible sense gratification because they have lost their religious center in their life. And this happens when the leaders become corrupted, the kings become corrupted and simply collect taxes without proper examples of their own. And then the Vaishyas, they start a revolution because they don't want to pay the taxes. Why should I pay so much? Right? And that revolution, Prabhupada explains, is called capitalism. How capitalism is when Vaishyas organize society. When the Brahmanas are organizing society, these Rajarshis, they have a religious society. When the Kshatriyas organize civilization, it becomes oppressive. And when Vaishyas plot their civilizations, they begin to dominate. They think, I will give so much to this Kshatriya as a loan, and then I will give this much to this Kshatriya as a loan. And when they fight, whoever wins will give back all the money to me, and then that I gave. And in this way, they will begin to dominate. And the Kshatriyas will depend on the money of the Vaishyas. The Vaishyas begin to dominate, which means it's all about money. And when they begin to dominate, they start factories where people are employed in hellish conditions, not giving them enough wages, as little as possible, making as much as profit, and making as much as they profit as they can. And how this led to revolution among the people, and that is or was called communism. Now, what effect it has on the people at large, right? The people at large, by this gradual degradation of society, they become, Prabhupada writes, like monkeys and dogs, thinking that this is the purpose of life, to enjoy sex, animalistic society, not understanding the spiritual purpose of life. So the sage is saying, my son, look at what you have done. And it all began with us, the Brahmanas, falling down. It's a very, very interesting point. And we can see that in society today. You can actually see how everything that Prabhupada says, all his words are true, are coming true. You know? And I mean, just in America, you can see how the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and how they are monopolizing so many, places like Amazon and things like that, how they are getting more and more powerful, with time, and how that can affect how the people, how it affects the people at large, right? Okay, so we'll go on. That's a big thing that it requires a whole, perspective and discussion. So we'll move on to the story. Last slide. How Shamika Rishi prays to the Lord, highlights qualities of forbearance in the king. These are the last 4 verses. Text 47. Then the Rishi prayed to the all-pervading personality of Godhead to pardon this immature boy who had no intelligence and who committed the great sin of cursing a person who was completely free from all sins, who was subordinate and who deserved to be protected. The devotees of the Lord are so forbearing. This is a very famous verse where he says, the devotees of the Lord are so forbearing that even though they are defamed, cheated, cursed, disturbed, neglected, or even killed, they're never inclined to avenge themselves. The sage thus regretted the sin committed by his own son. He did not take the insult paid by the king very seriously. Generally, the transcendentalists, even though engaged by others in the dualities of the material world, are not distressed, nor they take pleasure in worldly things, but they are transcendently engaged. So here, Shamaka Rishi is praying to the Lord. So on one side, the sage, the Rishi, is praying that the Lord, that his son be forgiven. But he knows that the proper position would be that the king curse the boy back, because he knew that the king was a devotee. But he knew that the king was a devotee, he would never do that. You know? So in other words, if and the King Parikshit had the power. In one place Prabhupada writes that Shringi, the Brahmana boy, he cursed, but devotees, pure devotees of the Lord, even they can curse, and their curse would be very, very effective, right? They have, in other words, Krishna gives them all these powers. He just doesn't exercise it. For himself, he doesn't exercise this, right? So, and the Shamak Rishi understood. You can see how this Rishi and king were on an equal par, level of spiritual advancement. And each one is playing their role in such a wonderful way. He's praying, he understands the heart of this king, how advanced he was, and how he would not curse back, because that would be a natural reaction, to give tit for tat, especially in a situation like this where his own life was at risk, right? But not for King Parikshit, because he's transcendently situated. Whatever the curse was, he accepted as Krishna's plan for him. And therefore, the sage Rishi is praying to the Lord to forgive his son. So you can see how Krishna is enacting this pastime, where he's choosing just the right people for his, to be instruments in his pastime. Right? This curse has been given by a little boy whose offense cannot be taken very seriously, right? And so it becomes Krishna forgives that, right? Because even though there will be reaction where the Brahmanas class are going to fall, one cannot be free from the reaction of offense, but yet his offense is minimized because Krishna chose a little boy for this. So Prabhupada writes how the consciousness of the devotee is very difficult to understand. Although he's living in this world, he's living with Krishna, and his dealings with the material world are just like a drama. Just like in a drama, one plays one part, right? And he may have to give $1 million, but it's all in that drama, but it's all a drama. You just get up and you walk away. Your drama, in other words, is not your real life. So this is what our material life is. It is just a drama. And we have a real life with Krishna. But we have become mad and we're living in this drama. But the pure devotee is alive in his relationship with Krishna. While he's in the mature world, he has his relationship with Krishna. And that is why he's forbearing. Now, how is it that these devotees are so forbearing? No matter what you do with them, they don't react. It's because of this, of their focus on Krishna. They see this material world as simply a drama, and they understand that their real relationship is with Krishna, and they're living in that relationship. So, just to conclude, how on one level we can understand the fortune of this great personality, Parikshit Maharaj, whom Krishna has chosen to enact this pastime, and who Krishna has decided to call him quickly to the spiritual world. What a great fortune of this person, right? And on another level, we feel sad that this great protector of religion has been removed from his position, cursed, unfortunately. But we also see on another level that it is Krishna. So when we are trained in this way, we begin to understand that this is happening not just in Parikshit's lives, but also in our own lives, how he's trying to make us more malleable to what Krishna's desires are, even though they are not so extreme as in the case of Parikshit Maharaj's life. So in this way, we can learn these lessons from this story. Okay, so here I will end my explanation of this chapter. Radhika, can you take over? Yeah.
Thank you for that beautiful, detailed analysis of the chapter. Just took a few minutes to start up my PowerPoint. Okay. Before I start with the chapter, I wanted to share the great news that Canto 4 is released. And I placed my order this morning, as did the other student that's part of my class from another family. So we're really excited to begin Canto 4 from the guidebooks. It's on Amazon, available for purchase. Mine is arriving between this coming Friday and Saturday. So looking forward to that. Okay, chapter 18. Maharaj Parikshit, cursed by a Brahmin boy. We always start with a summary in our guidebooks. So the story summary. Just 1 second, let me unpin your video. I'm sorry. I sent a text to remind me that Mataji's video is pinned. Okay, that should work. So the story summary begins. One day, King Parikshit was hunting in the forest. When he saw some stags, quickly he began to follow them. And it's just so nice because, there's a rhyme in between and the child can just read the story summary in an easy manner and follow what's going on in the chapter. Let me follow thee. To whither shall I follow? Whither shall I follow thee? Through the greenwood trees. So that's really cute in Old English. All of a sudden, the king started feeling really tired and he quickly became very hungry and thirsty. So he stopped following the stags and started to look for a place to get some water. As he was searching for some water to quench his thirst, he came across the hermitage of Shamika Rishi. There he saw the Rishi sitting very still, silent in deep meditation with his eyes closed. There's a nice illustration that goes along with the story and it spans over a couple of pages. We move on then to key messages that are grouped by themes. And what's nice is that it's not just verses in a sequence, but sometimes there are like the first and second verse, and then 24th and 25th, then 27th, 29th, and 31st, all have the same theme. So they're grouped together, and it's nice to understand the flow of the chapter. Sequence of events. So this is not in every chapter, but it's in a few chapters in Canto 1, and I really like this one. Where there are 6 events listed. Maharaj Parikshit goes out hunting. Feeling tired and thirsty, the king stops by the hermitage of a meditating Brahmin, Shamika Rishi, and so on. So there are 6 events that kind of cover the story. And the child is asked to draw pictures on flashcards for each of the event sequences below and keep them in your pocket for when you're on the go. Your flashcards can be used as memory cards, as story prompts to enact the pastime. Can you tell the whole story by just looking at your drawings? Try mixing them up and putting them back in the correct order. How fast can you do this? The other way that I have done it with my children is somehow I found, young children are very much into graphic novels or comic books these days. And so what I've asked them to do is to draw a comic strip. Where we've taken a sheet of paper and we've, with a ruler, made 6 sections. And then in each section, they draw a comic strip that depicts Maharaj Parikshit goes out hunting in one. In the second panel, feeling tired and thirsty, the king stops. And then third panel, deep in meditation, Shamika Rishi doesn't respond to the king's request. So that's kind of been the way that we've been doing this at home and in Sunday school. Comics are really inviting for the students that I find myself with. Verses. So one of them is from this chapter, which is verse 13, but there's also Tadvidhi Pranipatena from Bhagavad Gita 4:34. So these are verses that are listed as an encouragement to memorize them. Also, it says another fun way to memorize shlokas is to draw simple images or symbols as you speak, and remember to recite these shlokas from your heart. So Sanskrit memorization really helps with all areas of life. Helps to keep Alzheimer's disease away, according to research. Understanding the story. Now it's time for you to check how well you understood the story by answering these multiple choice questions. So there are 11 listed, and most have 3 answers, but there's also one that's a yes or no. Why was King Parikshit in the forest? He was hunting, he was taking a walk, or he was hiding? So some of them are pretty obvious. higher thinking questions. These can be assigned either in writing or just discussed orally. Some very thoughtful questions, such as, was Shamika Rishi wrong in not greeting the king? And we had a debate about this. So one side says, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's the king and he's a pure devotee. And the other side, well, he was in meditation. I mean, aren't you just supposed to like focus on Krishna? And isn't it an offense to be inattentive while you're meditating? So we had a really nice debate, but can also be given in writing. How can a great warrior like Parikshit Maharaj become fatigued? That's another really nice question. Also, this chapter is a real nice launch pad into forms of government and systems of economy. So, discussing anarchical and democratic and republic and monarchies, and discussing all of that, and Prabhupada's perspective on monarchy, and bringing it to the current context of, well, what do we see in monarchies today? From Cuba to North Korea to, Saudi Arabia, countries where there is monarchy. How are they doing today and why? Because Prabhupada talks about qualified kings. So we launched into this whole social studies unit, and also about economies, communism and capitalism, from a study of this chapter. So there's a question here on chapter 9. What are the results of abolishing the monarchical system, as explained by Shamika Rishi? All right, some artistic activities. The first one is make a snake. So this was a really, really fun one, especially because my younger son is really afraid of snakes. So the older one had a great time making this snake and scaring his brother. And it's a very simple way to take cardstock paper and then cut about 16 strips. And then you make a ring out of the first strip, and then you tape or glue it together and slide your next strip of paper through the ring and tape or glue it into a ring. And you repeat the process until you have a long chain of paper rings. And then also directions on how to cut eyes and create a tongue. So for a tongue, cut a fork-shaped tongue from the small piece of red paper, fold a small tab at the end and glue it onto the head. And for the eyes, you can glue on wiggly eyes. We used googly eyes, like they have on dolls, and they're available at the dollar store. So we used googly eyes instead. Moving on to an activity that has a resource at the end. So I put the resource here, but if you have the book, you'll see that it's at the end of the chapter. Snakebird game interviews. Using the game cards in resource 1, ask the person to your right a question from one of the boxes. For example, you may say box 1, and the person to your right answers the question in this box, which is, you're Shamika Rishi. Why did you not answer Maharaj Parikshit when he asked you for water? And then go around in a circle until everyone has had at least one turn to ask and answer a question. You can ask the same question more than once, and younger children who may not be able to read can say a box number, and older child and adult can read the questions. So differentiation given for different abilities of class in the class. Some nice questions such as, you're Shamika Rishi. What are you afraid might happen without Maharaj Parikshit to rule the world? Or you are Shringi, the son of Shamika Rishi. How did you feel after you cursed Parikshit when you went home and saw your father still in meditation? So questions that, go into their cognitive, emotional, all kinds of beings. And another comic strip. Comic strips are a great way to bring out the artist and storyteller in you. Plan and design a comic strip based on the chapter. You can also read ahead to include aspects of chapter 19 if you wish. And first do some research by collecting examples of comic strips, and then sketch out, write the story, make square borders, and write in text. So speech bubbles and thought bubbles, the way they're depicted in comics. Then we move on to critical thinking activities to bring out the spiritual investigator in you. There's an interview. Imagine you're to interview Maharaj Parikshit about the Brahmin voice curse and how he felt. Make a list of questions beginning with the 5 W's and 1 H. Who, what, where, when, why, and how, and write down the answers. And then we took this one step further, where then they have to write a summary or report on this interview. Quick fire activities to bring out the all-rounder in you. So several areas I mentioned here, such as in geography, study how guests are received by people from all over the world. Compare this research to the Vedic ideal. What are the similarities and differences? And again, please remember that in the book, there are multiple activities given so that multiple ages and multiple interest levels are accommodated. But you can pick and choose. Like, this is not something that I did. So these are given as options for the educator and for the mother or father, but certainly not meant to, like, overburden you. If something, if you have a certain pace that you like to move with the Bhagavatam, move on. But there are activities here to cater to those who might like such activities, like technology. Produce a video, interview a range of different devotees, asking them each 3 questions based on the topic, how to receive a guest. Edit your video, add background music and Shastra quotes if possible. Or cooking, sunrise thirst quencher. Take 2 equal parts of freshly squeezed orange juice and pomegranate juice and pour the pomegranate juice into a glass cup and then pour the orange juice on top. Pomegranate juice will naturally settle to the bottom, giving a beautiful 2-toned effect. Health and safety, studying the effects of dehydration of the body. Find out the effects of dehydration of the different organs of the body. How long can one survive without water? How long can one survive without food? Because we know that Maharaj Parikshit fasted for the last 7 days of his life without food or water. So we move on to the other activity, but there's also music activities provided related to this chapter. Adjectives, so learning English language arts. There are 3 characters in this chapter, Maharaj Parikshit, Shamikrish, and Shringi. And try to think of as many adjectives as you can to describe them. Make a list of the characters and the adjectives that describe them. And then there's a word game, snakebird word game. Draw a large letter S on a paper and then write snakebird strikes in 7 days inside the letter. So snakebird strikes in 7 days, you can see the illustration. And then draw a snake's face and tongue on one end of the letter. Draw wings in the middle, since Takshaka was a flying snakebird, and find as many words as you can using the letters from the phrase snakebird strikes in 7 days. So, writing this on whiteboard or blackboard, and then making words out of this. So, such as yes, Y-E-S, and so on. Fearlessness. In the purport, I think it's the purport, it's not the verse, yeah, it's in the purport to text 2, Prabhupada writes, furthermore, Maharaj Parikshit was always consciously surrendered to the personality of Godhead, and therefore he was neither afraid nor overwhelmed by fear due to a snakebird, which was to bite him because of the fury of a Brahmin boy. So discuss this verse in purport, and can you remember a time when you were scared and then thought of Krishna, making you fearless as a result? Ask your parents, brothers, sisters, friends about the same kind of event that happened for them, and write the stories down and illustrate with pictures. So perhaps, some of us might have been in an accident or something. Another activity about Story Mountain. First, draw a very simple outline of a mountain shape on a regular A4 size paper. And then cut out the events of the past time that are given in resource 2 right here, Maharaj Parikshit cursed by a Brahmin boy, and then place them in order on the story mountain. So start at the bottom and then start placing these clues moving all the way up. Use your story mountain to help you retell the story. So this is a nice way for them to verbalize events and put them in order that makes sense. Keywords, there are 6 words given here and an encouragement for them to look up their definition, what they mean. Words such as offense and curse and forgive, follow, meditation, angry. Maybe simple. For some older children, you're welcome to go into the story summary and, select another set of words. But it's a good reminder of what kind of English activities can be called out in the chapter. Sentence matchup. Match the first part of the sentence on the left with the part of the sentence on the right that correctly finishes the sentence. So very fun matching activity. Dear Shamik Rishi, may I have C. Some water, please, asked Maharaj Parikshit. And an extension would be for the child to copy it and write in the notebook. So you're practicing handwriting and you're learning correct punctuation and spellings. Theatrical activities, modern day tale. Write and perform a modern day skit or play based on the story of King Parikshit and Shamika Rishi. And you can use the following themes such as forgiving mistakes, uncontrolled anger, fearlessness, acceptance of actions, detachment from the world and possessions, surrender to Krishna, or action and reaction. So some contemporary, short skit, which uses one of these themes from the chapter. A word search. And of course, a poem, Shringi's Curse. Shringi was a Brahmin boy who cursed King Parikshit to die by the bite of the snake bird Takshaka in 7 days' time. Shamika Rishi was sitting in his hut in a mystic trance. His eyes were very tightly shut. King Parikshit came along and asked him for a drink, but the sage did not hear anything. King Parikshit left the hut without a drop to drink. As anger overcame him, King Parikshit didn't think. Picking up a dead snake, he placed it on the sage as an insult for the mistake he made. Shringi heard that his father had been disrespected by another. As anger overcame him, Shringi didn't clearly think, and he cursed the king for his mistake. The king and the sage both regretted how anger made them all forget that anger won't solve problems, it will only make them worse. Like the story of the king, Shringi's curse. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So a very nice poem that not only brings out the themes of the chapter and even the morals from the chapter, but also the storyline. One that really stands out here, there's a quote that says, "Act in haste and lament in leisure." That's something that we discussed based on this poem. And the answers are given at the end. So that is the chapter from the guidebook. All right, we would love to entertain your thoughts, your questions now. So please raise your hand and you can unmute yourself and ask. Okay, Pratikeli Radhika Matji, please ask your question.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Hare Krishna Aruddha Mataji. Thank you so much for the wonderful session. Thank you, Shri Radhika Mataji, for guiding us through the activities. And my question is, I have two questions. One of them may be a dumb question. I'll ask the philosophy question first. Mataji, when we speak about how Kali was permitted to stay in gold, now as Grihastas, we have to deal with gold as part of our tradition sometimes, and it is considered auspicious in our culture to wear gold for ceremonies. And sometimes traditionally we are required to purchase or exchange gold. So I've always wondered, how do we reconcile this with this teaching about how we must avoid gold in the use of, or rather in general use. And when we are discussing it in class with a general group also, how do we explain this to them? Yeah, that's my question. The first question.
Prabhupada did not criticize or the wearing of gold by women, because in fact he says that how in the Vedic culture, even the people who went to fight in the battleground, you may remember in Bhagavatam they talk about how they wear gold, and they have so much gold on their bodies, right? The fighters, the warriors, and the kings. So wearing gold was a sign of uh, culture, and it's not and Prabhupada was not against that. In fact, he criticizes modern day, where everything has changed from gold to plastic, and this is he says how that is so horrible, so degrading. But how in olden days, even their utensils that they ate from were made out of gold, so everything, and they were so rich and so opulent that they could even not care about it, those things made out of gold. I mean, they were that rich. And how the cows gave so much milk and butter that they would use that in ceremonies to throw at each other. And so there was so much plenty. And so this was Vedic culture. So the reason why gold is criticized is because it creates hate and envy and these qualities in us. So as long as we know the proper use of gold and we use it properly, there's nothing wrong with that. But if we are simply accumulating it for the purpose of enjoying, for the purpose of sense gratification, and we accumulate more and more, then that would be a bad thing. How this attachment to family life, makes us accumulate so much wealth, and then not for only for ourselves, but for our children, and then to our grandchildren, like that. So this mentality should not be cultivated, because ultimately the devotees have to understand, just like the Pandavas, just like Yudhishthira Maharaj, he was so opulent, but within a moment who could just walk away. So that kind of mentality has to be created side by side. That just like the kings, they would do religious rituals. All these kings were required to do big, big yagyas, but they knew the purpose behind the yagyas. It wasn't contaminating them, and so they were not affected by that. King Prachina Barhishad, he was affected by that. And so Narad Muni had to come and give him instruction, you see. So as soon, when we don't know the purpose of why we have gold, then it can become, we can degrade. And Prabhupada writes how the gold can be also used while worshipping the deities. So many things used to be. When deities, some beautiful temples in the south where they would make all the jewelry out of gold, but it invited thieves, right? So they stopped doing that. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Also, the points you gave about how the Vaishya community purchases the Kshatriyas, it was really, really enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing that. I had a question also for Sri Radhika Mataji about this activity in quick fire activities, the math activity, which discusses to divide the 24 hours of Maharaj Parikshit's day. Could you please guide us on how to actually do that? Is there some reference for how he spends his, or do we imagine what the day of a king would be like and proceed with that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a place in the Bhagavatam where there's a description, but we did this more from a creative writing perspective of imagine what Maharaj Parikshit's 24 hours look like. We know that a good portion of it he probably spent in meditating on Krishna, just like Ambarish Maharaj spent a good portion, meditating on Krishna, and that took care of everything that needed to be taken care of. So that's how we did it with this math activity. How many hours did he sleep and eat and do his sadhana, and then be with the citizens or be in his assembly.
Okay, thank you, Mataji. I also really liked your idea of making the sequence into a comic. That would be really interesting. Thank you so much, Hare Krishna.
Thank you. You've been just so regular. Appreciate your participation.
We have a little baby, so sometimes it's hard to be as active in class. Thank you so much for this whole opportunity to study Bhagavatam together. Thank you so much, Hare Krishna.
All right, our next question is from Shamasaki, my good friend from Chicago. We do Vaishnava Academy together. Mm-hmm. Please ask away.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. I found today's session really interesting, especially Mataji, when you were explaining the different systems of government, like under the Vaishya or the Kshatriya, and then also when Sri Radhika Mataji was explaining how it's not just about taking monarchy and applying it, because there's like, you can see what monarchy is doing today also is kind of messed up. So my question was kind of like, there's a lot of call for like social change and those kind of things. And like, what would you say, like, it's not just about like, how there was like a devotee running for president, Tulsi Gabbard running for president, and like that kind of thing. So is it about like, let's get devotees in government, or is it kind of like, let's try to change the collective consciousness of, I don't know if my question's really clear, but that's kind of like where I was going and trying to get some wisdom from both of you on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Prabhupada was not against devotees becoming, getting to the helm, the getting power, and exercising their power in a political system. He was not against that. In fact, Bhakti Vinod Thakur is a good example, where he was a magistrate and he was a devotee and wearing tilak when he would go to pass judgment all day. So, but what can we do collective, as devotees? I think the second point is very valid, where we can, propagate the bhakti cult, the chanting of the holy name, by which everybody, this yuga becomes delayed, the Kali Yuga, becomes auspicious. We turn things around in that way. And then but at the same time, we don't discourage those who want to move forward to try to make a change in the whole system. However, it's a very difficult one. With the way things are going, it's going to be very kind of a very challenging one. So the best thing would be is the Sankirtan process. That would be the best thing. The other day I just happened to be in the car, and how it turned, the radio came on, and I was hearing how these people were talking to a reporter, several workers in the Amazon company. They were talking, and they were talking about how in different ways Amazon is not treating its employees nicely. And they gave many, many very vivid examples of why they felt the conditions under which they work and the wages. So I was thinking how true what Prabhupada was saying, things are moving along in that direction. When we have, Vaishyas, taking over the kingdom, taking over the country, then it turns into that. And I was thinking how this is so true, the way Kali Yuga is progressing. And what can we do about it? Well, as devotees, we cannot go and start a revolution, It's just not going to be possible, in this time and age with the way things are going. So best thing is to try to make a change on the spiritual level, by propagating the chanting of the holy name. And that's why Prabhupada talks so vehemently about the need, for giving, what we have. And he says ours is a preaching movement because it really helps. And that's what all these kings were doing. They were, instead of stopping Kali from doing its duty, they were taking steps. Doing its nefarious activities. They were taking steps to curtail the effect of Kali. You see, Parikshit Maharaj allowed Kali to live, but he gave him no avenue to do his nefarious activities by educating the people. So educating the people would mean, of course, if one would be in a higher position, it's easier. You can enact laws, just like Parikshit Maharaj. But if one cannot do that, then at least on the ground level, we can change the consciousness of the people, And that would also change some aspect of the mentality of the people who are up there, if anybody wants to add to this or have any realizations, but this is how I see Prabhupada address this point. He actually laments the fall down of the monarchical system. He says the monarchical system is the ideal system. An enlightened king is the best system. And that's why when Radhika talked about comparing it with today's monarchy, wherever that exists, and and the example they're giving, and you can trace it down to the history of the fall down of the monarchical system, why it fell down, and the reason is because of the corruption that came into their lives, right? So but in contrast, the Vedic culture, we have this enlightened monarchy system, so wonderful, right? And how we see the fall down in today's age, how it gradually fell. So, but he does say that it is the best system because one enlightened king can actually take steps to change the whole society, you know. Yeah. So what can be done is just, make effect, whatever we do in that area will have a ripple effect on many, many areas. So we shouldn't think that what can I do, what little can I do, it won't have any effect. It will have effect.
Okay, thank you for your question, Shimasaki, and thank you, Mataji. All right, Mataji from Phoenix.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you so much for this wonderful class again. Mataji, I just wanted to check if my understanding is right. So based on all of this, so our consciousness and our culture, like our behavior is more important than the external facets or the trivialities that we focus on, right? And also when they say Bhagavata Dharma, is it the same as Sanatan Dharma? I mean, I'm not even sure if they're the same terminologies or different, or if I'm understanding them right. But I always have this question if the internal consciousness is more important than the external framework in this age. So am I understanding it right? Okay.
Yes, it is. From my understanding, Bhagavad Dharma would be the same as Sanatan Dharma, which means this dharma for the soul is to love and serve Krishna. And a dharma, society based on Bhagavad Dharma is the society that Parikshit Maharaj had, based on the principles, the religious, for avoiding the four sinful activities, that is a big, personified in Kali, and, and worshiping the Lord, and one can worship the Lord, one can have any type of faith, bona fide, and even during Parikshit Maharaj, that was he allowed people to have different faith, in terms of what religion they followed, but the principles were the same. They never changed, So he was very strict on that. And that's why he would make his rounds in the kingdom to make sure that these principles were being followed in the Varna Ashram system. Everybody was doing their duty according to the Devi Varna Ashram, So, so this is important, is to follow the Bhagavad Dharma versus, the external, like you said, the internal and external. This calls for internal cleanliness, you see. And the culture, the Vedic culture was helped in following these principles, these religious principles. They were meant to be an asset. And that's why it was very important to live within that culture. I mean, basically following the four regulative principles means that it means Vedic culture. Mm-hmm. It's an external thing. You don't, these four things, these four principles that we are supposed to follow, they don't take us back to Godhead. It's an external thing. It's an external principle. It's the external cleanliness, but that's also very important. Because that gives an impetus for the person to worship God. Without that, there's no impetus. There's no awakening. There's no, the person doesn't experience any attraction to chanting the holy name, you see. So both cleanliness has to be there. But of the two, obviously, internal is very important, and that comes with the Vedic culture. We think Vedic culture means the dress. No, Vedic culture means following these four principles. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions right now.
If there's time, I can ask one more. Okay. Thank you, Mataji, for the answer. Sorry, another thought when you were describing the four different the models of government was like according to like Vaishya or Shudra or whatever, they reward people and kind of put role models up, like this is the way you should be, right? Like who is looked up to in society is according to that. So in like for us also, who we kind of reward or who we put up as our standard, like I guess, is that something we could do without necessarily changing the whole society? Let's say like, okay, we're in a Shudra society, but we could in our house like say these are, you know, Brahmanas are the people that we want to follow, kind of a thing.
So in Kali Yuga, Prabhupada said that everybody is a Shudra. So nobody should be proud thinking that I'm a Brahmana or anything. But we can, by the culture of Krishna consciousness, we can all become Brahmanas. So for devotees, we go beyond the Varna ashram, because we understand that when one becomes Krishna conscious and chants the holy name, one surpasses these material designations, of which social order that we belong to. We go past that. The social order is very important, that which the king followed is because people were, they were on that platform of gradually purifying their life. Because in each ashram, the center is Krishna, So by gradually doing that, they were able to transcend all the 4 ashramas. And that's the whole purpose of the Varna ashram, is to actually go beyond all 4. To transcend everything and to become come on, because 4 Varna ashrams are dealing with the modes of material nature, the 3 modes of material nature. So the idea is to go beyond the 3 modes of material nature and come on the Shuddha Sattva, and that comes with getting out of all material designations, Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya, Brahman, nothing like that. So for us, we follow this the higher dharma, which is the Sanatana dharma. But for society at large, for a king who's ruling the kingdom, he has to make sure that the Varna ashram system is strictly followed. Just because of the law, to keep everything in order, basically, to keep people in the line. Because if they don't follow that, then they will just degrade. What happens if we don't? So basically it means following the Vedic injunctions. What do? In each ashram, there's certain Vedic rules and regulations that they need to follow in each ashram, you see? So if they stop doing that, then they degrade into animal life. So it keeps these material desires in check, under control. But because when they follow these rules, then they naturally do it in a way that's prescribed in the Vedas, which is pleasing to Krishna. And they gradually advance, you see. So basically the Vedas are for different people, for different modes of nature. And we because we are not pure devotees, we still have to follow, certain aspects of the Varna ashram, In other words, if we are in Grihastha ashram, we have to follow the rules and regulations of Grihastha ashram, We have to still follow. We can't, if you have a husband who's not quite Krishna conscious, it's not that we leave him and say, okay, I'm walking out because you're not a good devotee or something. No, we still have to follow that dharma because we are still, because if you move out, or wife or whatever, if you move out, then very soon we will degrade because we are not at that platform, you see. So even though we have the higher principle in mind, but still we follow aspects of our Varna ashram, and we keep within that limit because it's always purifying. Even for devotees, it's very purifying because we still have material desires. See, but ultimately, it's Sanatana Dharma. It's beyond all, designations. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any final question?
Mataji, can I also ask one more if there's time? Yeah. So Mataji, this is like different from the today's session, but so in general, so whenever I hear you like answer any question, you always talk about like Prabhupada and like Prabhupada's mood and everything. So how did you absorb that consciousness? And I'm just curious because like right now, even with the lectures, I'm like all over the place. Like whoever I listen to, I feel like so wow, But then like I kind of miss the point that we. I don't know what to how to actually even listen to or like focus on the mood of the person rather than just the externals, because I'm like very very much conditioned externally. So I was just curious, how did you I mean when you were homeschooling, like did you always like listen to Prabhupada lectures? Like how did you just cultivate that consciousness and how this relationship came about? I'm just curious about your journey too.
Well,
Yeah.
I was just like all young mothers. I was immersed in so many, seva. I had so much to do. I cannot say that I had time to read so much Shastra, but I was teaching them, but I had very little time to read on and absorb so much on my own. But I think it's just a purification that comes through time, of all our anarthas, and we just have to be patient and just give ourselves as much as possible to Krishna, and have faith in what Prabhupada is saying. So just even if we don't know so much and we don't have so much time, but just having the faith that what Prabhupada is giving is the best, and it works under all circumstances. Then I think for me it was a lot of purification, in my life, just because I had so many bad qualities, and so just trying to you know um, do my service, and at the same time trying to train my children. I think Krishna just over time gives us realizations about life in general. But what I would advise is just read Shastra with your children. It's very, very, because you get a chance to. Prabhupada writes, I was reading that how when you preach, when you train your children, then you actually get more realizations than if you were to do it on your own, because you're giving that knowledge to somebody, and preaching always gives you more knowledge and realization. So I did that. One thing I did was faithfully teach them Srimad Bhagavatam, and and with that, I think one's own advance, development in spiritual life comes, is when we do that in whatever form one must give. According, like Sutta Goswami said, one gives according to one's capacity. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Madhu.
Thank you.
Okay, one last question came in by text from Ratikeli Mataji. Is there any reference to the anecdote that Kali entered Parikshit's crown?
Oh. I haven't read in the Bhagavatam, so if anybody knows where it is, you can hear. Have you heard, Radhika? No? Okay, yes. I don't know. I'll try to find out, though. I can try to find out where is it mentioned. Maybe in another, Puran or something. It may be mentioned, very likely.
Yeah, we're polluted with so many different versions, and Ramananda, what is that, Sagar, or some Mahabharata, and all the TV versions that I can't keep things straight. So I certainly have not read this in the Bhagavatam myself.
Yeah, so if you stick to the Bhagavatam, but of course, if people ask you a question about that, you need to know where it comes from. But for yourself, for your own understanding, I would just keep to the Prabhupada's Bhagavatam. Just like in Ramayana, there's so many versions and so many stories. But what says in the 9th canto, we just stick to that. We just stick to that.
Yes, Mataji. Thank you so much.
Okay, any closing comments, Mataji?
Thank you all for this very inspiring audience and nice questions. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.